Here we go. Hello, this is Dr. Jackalyn Rainosek, and I am with DTP-Leadership Group. And I have the privilege of having my friend, Nigel Lakey, with me today because he's a conservative and I'm a liberal. But we can talk to each other. And this is Hot Topic, Bold Talk. So, Nigel, I'd really like for you to start first. Tell me, what do you think the reason is we have the capacity to talk about subjects that a lot of conservatives and liberals just can't talk about?
We should have a conversation around that, shouldn't we? So first off, thanks once again for the opportunity. I appreciate it. Let me say this, right? Is we respect each other. Now, where does that respect come from? And I think that you and I, when we have a conversation, right, we stay away from headlines and the inflammatory rhetoric. We stay away from trying to blame anybody. And if you think about a conversation that you want to have in a business environment, maybe, and I think it's worth saying here once again, right? We made our acquaintance at a private directors association in-person event. And, the spirit there was talking about board level governance, which is apolitical, but it's largely around, well, how do you make things better? Make a difference, make things better, celebrate your successes. And look, I think both of us have a similar bent there, which is, we want to make a difference, but you can't really make a difference by insulting or calling out other people. I think you can make a difference by challenging, and you can disagree without being disagreeable. So I think you and I, Jackalyn, we have the luxury of being able to just sit down and have a conversation, which we've done numerous times. Frequently, of course, we go for lunch and we talk about things. And look, we spend an hour and a half or 2 hours and we just have conversations. That's a luxury a lot of people I don't think allow themselves. And I think that you and I both, we have a responsibility to guide people to have those conversations. So I don't know, what do you think? Give me your point of view on that one.
Okay. Well, I appreciate what you're saying because I think that one of the things we had a discussion about is we said, we're not going to focus on politics. We're going to focus on subject matter that's happening in our country. And we're going to talk about things that we, as a liberal and a conservative, from our various viewpoints, can maybe bring something together and have a better understanding of what we could possibly do to move us from extremes in conversation to having more of a reasonable conversation. But I think the other thing is this. I know the type of business person you've been all your life. You know the type of business person I've been. I am committed to service with all my client base, and I do the very best I can. And I make every effort to show respect and caring for the human beings that I deal with. And I think you've done the same thing. The other thing that you have a difference in that I really appreciate is you're an immigrant. You came from Canada. And so I've always lived in the United States. So our perspectives on things are different. And but those differences do not divide us. They help me grow. So the reason I spend an hour and a half or 2 hours of a lunch with you is because I know something. I'm going to learn something. I'm going to have a different perspective, or I'm going to ask you a question and say, I really don't like what's happening in this situation. Nigel, how would you perceive this? And having been such an outstanding, business owner and been in many organizations and consulted with them, then you can give me some ideas, and all of a sudden I have a new perspective. And I think that I also provide that for you. So that's what I would say. Do you have anything else you want to talk about? The reason we're talking with each other?
I think a couple of things. So we're not trying to define the differences. I think what we're really working on here is to find a common ground. And maybe it's less common ground than it is a common understanding. And I think of the places and the times where I've had success, whether it's personally or business, of course. But I'm going to refer back to the old 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, and I've taught that course in a corporate environment, and still have a great deal of respect for those basic ideas. And one of them is, seek first to understand. And if you just, if you're waving the flag and yelling and doing that sort of thing, then you're not going to understand. And I don't know how, as human beings, we can advance, we can get past the rhetoric unless we sit down and have a conversation. And I'll say, look, there's one thing really between you and I. Neither of us is trying to prove the other wrong. And
Right.
that's an elegance in our conversation that I greatly appreciate. And I think we owe it to ourselves to continue that. So, here we are today again. We can find something that other people would find horribly divisive. Fisticuffs would break out. They'll yell and they'll
Right.
scream. But we're not. Neither of us is trying to prove either of them correct or incorrect. What I hope is, of course, when people listen to this, they would say, "This is a good conversation. There's a point of view. I have some other ideas, and maybe it doesn't change my position, but maybe I have a better understanding." And I think, as you said, each of us walks away from a lunch and saying, "I learned something here today, and I didn't have to get taught." And that's the difference with the
Oh, I like that
distinction.
idea. Yeah.
So we learn, we grow from that. I think we change, and look, I'm all about giving service back as well. I'm at that point in my career where I no longer have an interest in working in a corporate environment, but I do have an interest in seeing corporations be successful. And
Right.
I firmly believe that corporations, to be successful, have got to take a set of values with them into the boardroom, in front of their customer, with their vendors. And I'm going to make a quick reference here now that there's a new pope in the Catholic Church, right? Leo the 14th. Leo the 13th, I would say his focal point was the dignity of the human being. And I like
Right.
that. So, we treat each other as humans. We all have frailties. I mean, my goodness, I couldn't make a list long enough, I don't think, but it's not our task to focus on those, right? So here we are. We can live the ideas of Leo the 13th and put aside the Catholic Church, but it's the dignity of the human being. And I think your actions and your history very much in support of that, right? You would call it social justice. Maybe I call it something a little bit different, but I think if you can't treat people as human beings, and that's your personal life, your corporate life, whatever the case is, then you're not really living a life of purpose. And then maybe that's a horribly misused term, right? We talk, was I lead a purposeful existence? No, is I've got an existence with purpose. That's to serve, to share where I've made mistakes and hopefully prevent other people from doing that. Somebody at my eulogy will say that I was successful or not. And really all I hope that they say is, well, he was a good hand. I'm a service hand, right? I spent 45 years in the oil and gas business around the world. I don't know. I've learned a lot from the cultural aspect of that. I think from the last podcast, people might remember, I carry 3 passports. Each of them has importance to me, but I identify myself as a US person. That's my passport of existence, right? But the other citizenships give me a sense of history, and that's good or bad. None of the passports I carry, none that anybody carries, can say, man, we're the best country on the face of the earth, right? But
Right.
I think the one that I identify myself with, US citizenship, is this is a country with opportunity, with purpose, that can make a difference, and people stand a chance here. So I want to see people stand a chance and do well. And I think you share that same point of view.
I really do. And all the things you've just talked about, I can truly support. So, we've chosen today to talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion. Now, I'm purposely saying the words, not the acronym, because I think the acronym has really taken what diversity or equity or inclusion really mean, and they've taken it out of context. So, what I thought we could do is talk about what was the driving force that we can see that led to having diversity, equity, and inclusion programs. And I'm going to ask you to start first.
Yeah, certainly. Let me reflect a little bit. on both upbringing and experience, right? Where I've been, again, in a business environment, experienced some success is by hopefully, and not always have I been that successful, but hopefully making the effort to get the best possible people involved in whatever it is that I'm doing. Now, I don't like the acronym DEI. It's horribly misused. I mean, it was a terrible launch and all of these things, right? But I will say, I don't know how you succeed in business or in a personal life living in isolation. Now, people could throw racism and bigotry and all these sorts of things there. That's not where I want to go. What I want to do is talk more on the positive side of things and say, to me, this means getting the best possible resource. Now, you could say that's meritocracy. Well, I think that can likewise be mischaracterized, right? So let's be careful with words and acronyms and definitions and that sort of thing. And I think what I want to do is try and bring the context into play, which is from the diversity point of view, I need people who've done different things. I need people who've seen different outcomes. I need people who have failed and also have been successful, not only in isolation fail or only in isolation hitting home runs and being successful. I need people who've got the battle scars, the experience, that kind of thing. And to me, that brings a couple of really good values to the table. One of which is, I'm going to say, critical thinking, which is to say, there's a myriad of choices here. And just to push that up to a board level quickly, I've got lots of choices, but I need to make a decision. So what's that going to look like, right? And for me, I need lots of people who've had the same choices or different choices. And I want people who just are confident, right? They believe in the decision that we're going to make. And I believe you only get that because you've got a lot of experience. And experiences are myriad. And I also want to put that in context, right? Because the experience is not just business, it's cultural, it's personal, it's interpersonal. You have to have made bad hires and realize that you've made a mistake to recognize when you can make a good hire. You have to have completely screwed up the execution of a contract for a handful of reasons, or one, to know what good contract execution looks like. So I'm going to say, put the acronym aside, and just for the moment, let's talk about the diversity side of things. And I will say, right, and this is more of a PDA point of view on it. When I look at a board, I don't necessarily think that I have to have a representation of every demographic on my board. What I do need, though, is a representation of the people who are in the business on my board. And similarly, in my company, if I'm engaged in, data processing, I don't know what diversity in data processing looks like. Okay, I'm just not familiar with that business. But if I'm at a board or in a company that's engaged in person to person, whether it's sales or service delivery or something, I really better understand the demographics of my customer, my supply chain, that sort of thing. So when I'm looking for diversity, to me, it's, what have you done? And I want to find the people who are really good at that. So there's a meritocracy aspect to diversity, but it's not the acronym. So we'll put that away and think again about, well, what is this? How do you live your life around this? If you're going to embrace diversity, respect the human dignity, what does that mean to you?
Well, and I think you've made tremendous points. And so what I want to do is just say, I think some of the greatest learnings I've ever had are through my failures. Now, I don't want to repeat them again. So I've done everything I could to analyze what my behavior was and how did it impact the situation, or how did it impact the group, or how did it impact the organization I'm working in, and saying, how can I change that? How can I contribute to it, and so forth. I think what I would say about diversity is, because I have done many diversity, equity, and inclusion programs along with week-long programs and training and all things so like that. And I'll talk a little bit later on what I think have been the mistakes made by people that didn't have the knowledge base to do this. But I think what I think about diversity is I don't have the same experience as you because you're male and I'm female and you come from Canada and now you're a United States citizen. I don't have the same experience with one of my friends that's African American because I have not lived in her world, but I can learn from her world and can gain from it. And if she has the skill base to be in my organization and contributed to it, like a very dear friend of mine that's a business associate of ours, then I see value in her. And then what I think is the more that I see different perspectives about what people bring, the more I realize that, the words that have been used that sometimes triggered people as race or sex or gender or LGBTQ or disabled or whatever. But my point is, I think that the other thing that was a part of these programs was equity, because there were places where people weren't giving opportunities for them to be a part of the world that you and I live in, and that we could find as very valuable resources. One day I had a conversation because I was doing a program for the Houston Municipal Courts. And I had a person there that was handicapped. And we started talking and he started telling me all the things, all the challenges he has because the courts had not put in various ramps or other things or what was happening. Yet this man, I was told, was one of the most brilliant IT people that I had on staff in a long time. So I think what I'm looking at when I look at diversity is I also want equity. I want an opportunity for anyone that has the skills or the talent or the knowledge or the experience to contribute to anything I'm doing. And I think you're saying the same thing. I want those people to be the ones that I interview. And I want them to feel included in the organization. Because there's one thing as a PhD that I know. The greatest thing we have in life is we want to be included and recognized as human beings. And we want to be appreciated for what we can contribute. So one of the things I love about the Leadership Challenge as a leadership program, it's a constant emphasis on letting people know what they need to change in order to be more successful and develop themselves. But they also want to know how I recognize their talents and their skills and their value to an organization. So diversity, equity, and inclusion are words that I use to describe a very healthy work environment where both you and I can work along with many other people that are diverse from us in our perspectives and their experiences and their cultural backgrounds, so that we can reach the greater population, which is the world customer base. I don't think we can succeed as an organization unless we have that diversity. So that's what I could, and if you want to say something else about what I've said, or I can go to what I think is another question for us, but please let me know where you want to go.
Well, I've got some thoughts here. So one thing I think that you identified there is self-awareness. Now, to me, none of these things are going to succeed if we have a scorecard. That's not what this is about, right? Mm-hmm. So when I think of diversity, we've talked about that. When I think of equality, part of this has been miscast as saying, well, everybody gets the same outcome. No. And I think we have to recognize that some people, and look, there's no bigotry, no racism, no misogyny or anything here. It's like, some people they can't get to that point. Now, where we have people who've got talent and skills, et cetera, and you're looking for a profile, somebody who's got the talent and skills, do not exclude them. And to me, one thing we have to be very careful here is to recognize that the antithesis of equality is bigotry, racism, et cetera, right? It's judging people on the label that they apply to themselves. Now, that's probably going to inflame a lot of people, but think about this instead. What is it that you want to accomplish? What's the task in front of this person, et cetera? So don't put a barrier there. Now, I sat through a webinar kind of thing, and it was on recognizing the values of disabled persons at a board level. And I'm going to get the title incorrect. I don't have it in front of me. But I've been with companies where we've had disabled people on the board. And I've willingly, absolutely made accommodations for them, which is, I got to make sure that there's an elevator get to the second floor. I got to make sure that you can park, et cetera, et cetera. And I hadn't viewed that as a burden on the enterprise, because here's a person who's got a skill set that I think will benefit the enterprise, right? Not just today, not for the moment. And this is way, way before there was any sort of virtual signaling around this concept. It was, we need a director. We need somebody who's done a handful of things. Yeah, it's some hard knocks too, right? But it's got the experience to say, this is a good voice to have around the board table. So, and I think we'll get to this, but one of the reasons why this has been a bit of a tough road is to say that, well, E means everybody gets the same outcome. No, I think it means everybody gets a chance. And look, to me, that's a reason why I'm happy to carry a US passport and identify myself, because we have this thing called a Constitution. The first 10 articles are a Bill of Rights. And guess what? It says you will not discriminate. And that's a couple hundred years old. And that still works, right? So stop discriminating. And like, I know people who, for whatever reason, right? I don't care. They're this side, that side, up, down, but they are prejudiced. So the first thing I would say is get rid of the prejudice. Put aside that impression of the person based on color or whatever, or the accent they may have, and instead think about the skill set. And I'm going to put a lot of our conversation here in the framework of saying board level, right? Because I think that's important. I need at a board level talent. I need experience. I need a touchstone that other people can look to and say, well, I'm confused with this, or I don't understand it. Who do I have here? And the last thing I want is a bunch of people who all see through the same lens with the same experience. I've been there, I've rode that horse, and I can tell you that's just a recipe for a train wreck. So on the equality side of it, start thinking about getting rid of the barriers. And that's as much mental as it is physical, right? It's not just making sure that the person in a wheelchair has access to an elevator to get to the second floor, but also recognizing that, guess what? Our restrooms have got to be compliant. I've got to make sure that the person can go get a cup of coffee, these sorts of things, right? And again, I'm saying this is, 25, 30 years ago, long before the EI as an acronym existed, but we accommodated. And we said, we need this diversity of thought. So treat the person as an equal. And, really, once you get rid of the artifact of the wheelchair or missing a finger or something like that, you need to pull yourself up to that level and think, well, there's knowledge here, there's talent, there's skill. And the person has got the best possible profile for this skill set or talent set that I need. So there's the equality aspect. I'm not sure that that's going to satisfy people, but I hope that that's clear to you, and very much in support of what you talked about with equality. Yeah.
Well, and I think what we're talking about too is, one of the sad things that we'll get into in just a moment is how the resistance started. Now, I know good and well that I used a disabled a moment ago because I wanted to emphasize that we have some people think about it from their perspective. I know that there was there's a resistance to using terminology because they get angry with it or they don't feel comfortable with it or whatever else. And we'll get into that in a moment. I realize that physically challenged human beings, which I like the term better than disabled, but I really like physically challenged human beings because I think all of us are going to be physically challenged at some point in our lives. And I've learned a heck of a lot from physically challenged human beings that I've worked with. It's not just at the board level for me. It's in every aspect of the organization. I don't care whether it's administrative associates. I don't care if it's midline managers. I don't care if it's executives of all types and whatever. If we don't have a diversified perspective, we are not going to make the best decisions. And I think that's what you were saying earlier. And that's what really makes a difference for me. If you want your company to be profitable, then you have to have a diversified organizations, or you're going to miss perspectives that you don't have. And I think over the years, I've been shocked at the things that I had to change my perspective on and open up my mind more because I hadn't had an experience with somebody that was from this country or this culture or this whatever. And what I know is once I opened up my mind and opened up to the possibility and to listen to them, to what they have to offer, then I've made much better decisions in who I've have been a part of my organization. I don't hire employees anymore, but I have business associates that have very different points of view. And I'm thankful for that because we also have the capacity to be respectful, like we're talking about here, to have common ground. And that's the reason we can contribute to my company, DTP-Leadership. Now, what I'd love to do is I'd love to go to, and it's not the easiest conversation to have, but I'd like to talk about the resistance that I think we face with the acronym. And so what I thought about, you get to go first, and then I'll come after you.
Let's talk about the resistance. So here's first off, a sweeping generalization, but bear with me for a moment. The first thing is this is legislated. Now, I've talked earlier, right? I'm absolutely a fan of a de minimis government. And, we can talk about culture and values and, whether you embody the whole spirit of the Bill of Rights, et cetera, et cetera. And there's a lot of nuances underlying that. But to me, the resistance is that you've mandated that if you're going to do work for the government, that you must do this, you must do this, you must do this. Now, here's the sweeping generalization, right? Nobody can say that because you uphold the DEI values, and that's as the acronym, that your company is better, is more efficient, is more profitable. And look, there's studies, and I'm not trying to call out anybody one way or the other, but the fact that it's legislated and mandated, and you have to keep score. When I look at a company, and again, I'm looking at a board level, and it's not to say that at a management level, at operation level, none of this applies, but to me, it's more, here's the frame of reference. As a board member, I've got a responsibility to the shareholders, which is to exercise governance, right? Protect the shareholders' interests. Now, I may have a strategy as a corporation, and management's supposed to, do that strategy thing and then execute it. But, first and foremost, one may say is to be profitable. So I don't want to do anything that's injurious to the shareholders. So when I have a government that interferes in free markets and tells me I've got to do this or do that, I have to look at it and say, well, this impacts my ability to operate a profitable company. Now, that's again the sweeping generalization. But I think the way this whole initiative was positioned, it allowed everybody to be special, everybody to have an identity. And now how can I do the diversity thing any longer, right? I can't hire everybody that represents every mythical demographic. So bear with me for a second. It eliminated this concept of choosing the best person. irrespective of whatever marker they may have. And instead, it forced me as a company to hire and keep score of a demographic. And it's difficult to do. It typically results in displacing some other people who are in roles and who are performing exceptionally well. And then it made it to the point where if I wanted to contract with the government or some other things, that I had to fit this box. And it meant that necessarily the government was not contracting with the best possible supplier. All right. So there's the sweeping generalizations that people can criticize. But I will also say that the advocates of, again, the acronym DEI chose to be highly activist. And that just made it more difficult to accept. So, here's me as a conservative. And again, this is not politics, but it's saying this goes against some of the values that I just espoused. I like this concept of lowercase d, e, and I think that I've lived it. But now, my goodness, I have to start keeping score of things that are really irrelevant to the performance of the business for my ability to satisfy my client. And I just feel that of any government policy, this was just very poorly managed. Instead of talking about the value to enterprise, the value to society, I think this just ended up being extremism. Now, if it were cast as highlighting some of the things we just spoke about, which is hire the best possible person, but instead of saying get rid of the racism, get rid of the bigotry, get rid of the prejudice that you have, it became well, you have to have this on your organization. And I think that became difficult because to some extent, and maybe even to a large extent, it meant that I wasn't getting the best possible set of talent for that. Now, I think either side here chose to light fires and then throw diesel on them, and that's very unfortunate. But from the point of view that I have, I just think that this was launched with the wrong sort of messaging. Now, for me, again, as a company, I'll turn this over to you right away. I would look at it and say, well, I'm already doing that, right? I'm already living up to this concept and the spirit of it. But now you're telling me I have to keep score. To me, it also falls into this ESG, right? Which is it's a horrible acronym now too, because to some extent, it prevents companies from delivering quality service and adding value. And I'm going to go back, you get your personal values. So take your personal values, make sure that they live within the corporate environment. If they don't, then you have to think about whether you're working for the right company. Why are you working there to begin with? So your thoughts.
Well, and I appreciate all of what you've said. And I guess having done so much work in diversity, equity, and inclusion, because I've spent it's more than 50 years now. I'm not going to admit my age right now because ageism is alive and well. So I'm not going to do that because I think I'm an extremely talented woman. And I've been in business for 48 years. And I know, I've worked in 60 different industries. So I'm going to leave it with that. And so what I'd say is, I think that unfortunately, because of the bigotry and because of the attitudes of many people, that the civil rights movement had to happen. Now, I truly believe that. However, affirmative action was only supposed to last for a little bit to give women and persons of color and those that were in the LGBT community or what physically challenged or emotionally challenged, whatever. It was to give them an opportunity to have the chance to speak and to be heard as a possible candidate for jobs in organizations. After that, we had value and difference. And so I think people got stuck in affirmative action and thought they had to account for things like that. And I think it was destructive because then it started raising hackles about what we were having to do. And the truth of it is, I want to look for the most qualified people that I can have in my organization. That's what you're saying. I just want to be sure that I've opened up the avenues for various people to come in and have the possibility of being interviewed by me, and then deciding what skill bases they bring. In valuing difference, I begin to learn a lot more about culture. So to me, what happened was through learning the backgrounds and the culture and the experiences of various groups, then I was able to see the resources they could bring that I had no knowledge base of. I don't care how many years I've been doing this work, over 50. I'm still unaware sometimes of things I do as a white woman because that's the world I've lived in. But I'm very willing to hear all sides of any issue so that I can then see what is the best way we can move forward in any nonprofit I'm a part of, or any organization I'm part of, or any board I'm a part of, because I've served on a lot of boards. I think another thing you were talking about that I think is super valuable as well is we then finally got to the place where we could truly appreciate what having diversity in an organization, or having people included and knowing they were important to the organization, or having the possibility of each person in the organization having equity to the point that they knew that they had a chance to apply, or they had a chance to speak. Nigel, one of the things that bothers me so much is in every organization I've taken the leadership challenge into, is there are people that come up to you and say, oh my God, you're telling us that we have a right to have a voice. And I purposely put administrative associates for the VPs in the same training programs. And the reason I did that was because the VPs never saw what the real resource was of their administrative associates. They're the ones that sit at their desk and they listen to all the comments that a person makes to them before they go in and see the VP. I can guarantee you that the administrative associates knows more about that person's perspective than they'll probably hear when they talk to the VP, because they're not going to say it the same way. Now, when we live in a world like that, we can start teaching people to have a voice and do it respectfully and honorably with humility and willingness to work with each other. Then we have what I think is the basis of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I want to stop having pain in organizations. And that's the reason I do organizational work and coaching and all kinds of things. I want people to get out of their pain and get into their potential and be able to know what behavior patterns are going to need to change in order to be as successful as they can be and to reach that potential. And I think that what the basis was, we got stuck in affirmative action. We didn't really see what the value was of having cultural appreciation. And then when we got to where we were going to do something really constructive in organizations, we didn't leave the quotas and all that behind. And I'm not that kind of person. I have never supported that in any diversity program I've ever had. I've just asked that we could open things up so we could see who are the best qualified and who are the ones that have the greatest capacity to contribute to an organization or board or whatever I'm on. So I know what the resistance is. I spent 25 years in National Training Lab Institute. And they were, in 1945, the organization that truly brought the issues of inequality to America. And they started having programs that helped us understand what we were missing and how we were creating inequality in our choices and all kinds of things we did. What I know is through all that experience, I have learned. And that's what I know. But I've spent a lot of time teaching a lot of my male friends how to do diversity. because it's not their part of their experience. They're very appreciative of it. And now they run organizations that have a lot of diversity, equity, and inclusion in it. But I think what happens is that we had non-trained people who were assigned to create something because they thought they had to do it because the government supported it. And they did not get people like myself and many of my friends that are part of NTL that had the training, the knowledge, and experience to do it in a very professional way, and one that was respectful and would broaden the perspective of who's going to become a part of an organization. And so I understand what some of the anger is, but one of the things I will say is when it takes time for somebody to learn the value of having diversity, of having equity, or having people included in an organization and emotionally connecting them. The more dedicated and loyal employees are the ones that are truly valued, and they know they're included in the decision-making process, no matter what level we are. One of the things that I'm proud of, that I feel very grateful of, is when I finished the training at the Houston Municipal Courts with the executives and their administrative associates. The executives came to me and said, I never realized the resources they were to me. Thank you so much. The executive administrators came to me, 8 of them, and said, we want to make Houston's courts 20 locations clean and green, and they're not clean and green. We want to do it. We want this project. They never had seen themselves as leaders. They presented their program to the executive team. They ended up, the reason you walk into a Houston Municipal Courts location today and you see clean and green containers is because of those 8 administrative associates that realized that they had a voice. Now, that's what I think that diversity, equity, and inclusion can really do for an organization. So I'll stop. It's your turn.
Let me take a breath. So civil rights movement, can I say this? It forced this country to live to its constitution. That's an oversimplification, right? But look, the Constitution prohibits discrimination. Okay. And look, as an immigrant, I studied that because I thought somebody in my citizenship exam was going to ask me questions about how many amendments to the Constitution and such, right? So I became a bit of a student of the Constitution. I like it, by the way. I don't think it needs to be changed. But again, civil rights movement said, look, you have to start living this way. Good. And that's right.
Thank you.
And that's just. Now, the other comments you made, let me try and sort of weave this together, okay? If it's mandated, it's going to be resistance. But this is, and you and I talked about this at lunch, right? This is a generational issue. This is not something that's going to be fixed by one administration or another. And instead of talking about the value of it, et cetera, and talking about it in reasonable terms, it was just, if you don't do this, bad things are going to happen to you. Well, come on. People and corporations are going to resist that. Nobody likes a threat. We just see that risk. Talk about what the opportunity is instead, right? To jump around a little bit, when you think about the inclusivity aspect, take away the DE capital I inclusion and think about, well, I've got this organization I'm trying to run. I got a bunch of people at various levels who do things. I think I've got a bit of a responsibility to understand what they do. So I'm the person, I had this conversation with somebody yesterday. It's like, well, what's your day? Well, if I were in a corporate environment, probably 50% of my time is spent influencing other people's decisions. I'm not sitting down with spreadsheets and building PowerPoints. And I know people who that's 90% of their time, right? I'm not saying that I'm politicking, but I am talking to people and I'm thinking, well, my real job here is to make sure that other people can do their job. So the whole inclusion thing by necessity, I learned this really early in my career, is to be successful, other people have got to be successful. So find out what prevents them from being successful, right? And then give them the tools and resources. And the greatest failure of managers is to under-resource the people who get things done. So I can say once again, from the inclusivity point of view, I've lived a life of inclusion, and it's been cultural. It's been out of necessity. I just, I struggle a little bit with the people on either side of the extremists saying, well, how do you even have that point of view? I mean, what is it that you don't understand about the concept here? And I think, look, people will, they'll choose to make an issue of things and don't understand it. I have very little time for them, right? So if you think about trying to be successful, irrespective of what level that you're at, you need to be able to talk to your supervisor. And as an executive in the C-suite, I've worked for a company where I was told to not go talk to board members, and I'm thinking, holy crap, that's compartmentalized. It's not like I'm going to think on somebody, but there should be somebody at the board that, man, you ought to be able to go have lunch with them or something. Anyways, but I've also been in enterprises where, yeah, you're encouraged, please, please, please go talk to somebody on the board. Go, have a conversation with them. You keep it professional. You don't make it personal. Now, the counter to that is within my own organizations, it's, I need to know who's working for you. So I go walk the shops. I talk to the welders. I talk to the people who are doing things. And it's not to jump the chain, but if I have a manager that's preventing me from doing that because they want to compartmentalize the information, then that's an operational problem. Okay. So I need to fix that. So when I think about the inclusivity point of view, it's making sure that people have a voice. And it's not the political point of view on that, right? It's saying, I got people who are doing things. I need to know what their challenges are. I need to make sure that they can be successful. My failure lives with me if I were an executive. Success belongs to everybody else but me. But failure is mine and mine alone. So how do I make sure that I don't experience failure? I do that by making sure other people succeed, not by subverting them, not by sabotaging them. So what I'm going to get back to is, if culturally, if from your own education, from your own experience, you don't recognize that, then I think somebody saying DEI, you're going to fight back against that because it goes against all of your own beliefs and values, right? So I'm, reflect on our earlier conversation when I think of some of the values that I have, right? As a conservative, one is personal responsibility. And I think that extends to corporate responsibility. The person is a corporation is a person, right? So my personal responsibility, again, I'm going to go back to Pope Leo the 13th, right? Dignity of the human. Why do I want to see people fail? I know people, and you do too, likewise, right? That take great joy in seeing other people fail. And it might not be active. It might just be that it's this passive aggressive bullshit about, well, I'm not going to help you. I detest and despise people like that. And I know many of them. Okay. So what is it that you can do to personify inclusivity, lowercase I? I mean, my goodness, if I think about diversity, I want the people, I want to make sure that they're included, and I want to make sure that they have a voice, because how do I know what's going on the assembly line unless somebody can tell me, right? And it's not some convoluted, here's a form that you fill in. So I'm going to say that this is a cultural issue that we face. And if we don't sort out the education side of this, which is to say the next generation as it shows up needs to have a different point of view, right? And you can say, well, let's get rid of the bigotry. Let's get, I don't know what the right messaging is, but, part of it is at the educational institutional level, take all the extremism out of there. Let's think about the things where you and I, as opposites of the political spectrum, where we find common ground. And, oddly enough, we don't differ on a lot of things.
No, we don't.
What is it that we do?
No, because honestly, personal responsibility is a major issue for me. Yeah. I mean, it's my commitment. Yeah. Nigel, what I was going to say is I think we need to have another conversation about the message that we think needs to be put out to move away from DEI. And I like your terminology of the little letter I for, integrity, and for the little d for diversity, and the little I for inclusion, and the little e, excuse me, for equity. But I think what we've done is we have not accepted what the words meant, and we've not helped those individuals that are so much against it to at least open up and say, could I understand? And I know that we have limited time, and this is a subject that I think we need to go into and talk more about what we think the messages need to be. And I haven't had that conversation with you, so it'll be a very interesting one. And we can figure out what it is.
Let me reflect on, what people would say these days is a classical education. It's social studies, it's history, it's geography. And I think as a society, right, we decided that's no longer important. And we're working hard to polarize people. So I'm just going to say, is again, the sweeping generalization, let's stop the polarization. Let's get back to, some of the fundamentals here. And look, I don't have the answers, but I'd like to sit down with people and see if collectively we can find out what those are. But our society, this great social experiment we call the United States of America, it's not any other country. I don't care. Put a name. It's not Canada. It's not France. It's not Argentina. It's none of those things, right? It's a completely different structure. And it works pretty well, but people need to respect it and also understand what I think the founding fathers meant. Now, I'm kind of an originalist, I suppose, from that point of view, but let's put that into context here in the 21st century. We have got to get past the point where we denounce people because of their political thoughts or opinions, right? So first off, let's stop excluding people from whatever side in the conversation. Let's stop the rhetoric. And look, that's everybody. And I would like to say in a corporate environment, many of us can have an influence there. We're short-lived because look, I'm an old white guy. I'm the antithesis of DEI, capital D, E, and I. But I'm also a reasonable individual with a lot of experience who says, man, I know living in a bigoted world is just not, it doesn't work, right? I can't succeed, and no company I've worked for can succeed in that environment. Now, I've had the luxury, one, of a classical education, being an immigrant and having worked to understand how this country operates. And I have a lot of respect for it, man, a lot of love for it. But also having been all over the place and figured out, well, how do I get this operation to succeed? And it's not by showing up with my own rule book from wherever. It's about saying, holy crap, we have a set of problems here. How do we solve this? Now, there's a pile of metaphors in there, but I think this is a place where we have to start seeing if we can make a societal shift. And whatever impact we can have, it's just depoliticize every aspect. Get back to some of the basics here. Let's teach people about how you become an adult, how you go to school, get a degree, or don't go to school, get a degree, take a trade school path, but how you come out of the other end of that, add value, and not just feel a sense of entitlement. Now, these are, there's another topic, I guess, 3 or 4 of them, but we are running out of time. We covered a lot of ground here today. What do we do next? What's the thing, the theme, the train of thought that we carry on to the next conversation?
Well, I think you and I are going to have another lunch because we have so many conversations, and we can decide what we're going to talk about. But I think one of the things that I would end this conversation with today, I want more government because I want more support for the lower class and some of the individuals that are really struggling. You want less, but we tend to get to the place where we say, how can we be of service to people, and how can we help them reach their potential, whatever it is? Do we do it? How do we educate people? I went through civic courses my entire life, and I know and understand the Constitution of the United States the best I can. I carry a copy of it around with me, so occasionally I read it. I know you do the same thing in a lot of ways. So I think, I don't know what we're going to go through next, but I know that I think what we've done today for people is to say, see, you can talk about a topic, DEI, and change it to the little DEI, and you can have a reasonable conversation and come up with both of us admitting how our various positions have put us, could have put us in an extreme place, and that's not where we are. And we're going to keep talking. So I just want to say to you, Nigel, I'm extremely grateful you're coming on my podcast. I can't wait to have you at least once a month, because we're going to have a lot of other great conversations. And to me, the greatest thing is that I respect you and I love you. And I think you are a very important friend of mine. And I wouldn't have it if you didn't have a different point of view about some things. And yet we find common ground. So I'll be happy to hear any comments you have, but that's the way I would end this.
Well, I appreciate that, and I agree with you. So, the conclusion, if I had to put it into a sentence or two, is all of these things that we've got, we can solve with the materials in the room, and change, the next great idea comes from a conversation. If we don't have the conversation, if we don't respect other people, if you can't carve out the time to have the conversation and not have it an argument, then we're not going to make a difference. So let's have a conversation. And I challenge the listeners here to have another conversation and then make a difference. So the next conversation over lunch or whenever, we'll talk about the next thing that we can do that helps people make a difference. I don't know what else I'm going to do in my older years, right? I'm not going to run for politics, but I do know and I do believe that I can make a difference. And I'll stand on the same soapbox time and time and time again. And I just say, I'm here to make a difference. And my LinkedIn wallpaper says, make it better, make a difference. What else can we do? Let's make a difference.
And I would like to end with something, because I think it is making a difference. But my purpose in life is to be real every day of my life and live in truth. And I think that's what you and I both do. We make every opportunity to be real with each other and to live in our truth, and then listen, open our hearts and minds, and we come to a very good place with common ground.
It's
so
hard
thank
to be
you, Nigel.
It's hard to be authentic because you expose yourself, and it's
Right.
hard to be consistent, right? So, Jackalyn, thank you. What a great way to spend an hour. And let's not be shy. Let's go have lunch and let's think about what our next topic will be. So thank you so much for the time, and thank you so much for the opportunity.